Hey guys, kinggath here with another episode of Bethesda Mod School. So in this lesson, I want to show you guys several things. I'm going to show you roughly how you upload a mod to Bethesda.net, though I'm not going to go through the full steps because most of it's pretty self-explanatory after you get past the first couple of hurdles. And the second is I'm going to talk about BA2 files, why they're important, how you can make them, because you have several different options to do so. And I'm going to show you some tricks I've learned to fix issues with creating archive files. For example, there are issues with putting sound files in BA2s that I'm sure a lot of people have run into. There are issues with texture files in BA2s that I'm sure a lot of you have run into. And there are a lot of annoyances with BA2s, such as it taking forever for them to be created. It can be obnoxious to update them. There are all sorts of little things that can prevent people from wanting to use BA2 files, but I want to encourage you guys to use them, and I'm going to show you some ways to get around some of those common issues. So this is going to be a lot of random little bits as opposed to one solid tutorial. It's just going to be little bits of knowledge here and there across multiple fronts. I'm also going to be showing you a tool called Archive2, which will let you extract all of Bethesda's files so that you can get them into your hard drive loose so that you can start flipping through and looking through them, which I mentioned in the material swap tutorial that would be a useful thing to do, because then you can have access to the loose files and start opening them up in different software. Whereas if they're all in Bethesda's BA2 archive files, it can be kind of a pain to get to them as a method of just browsing through them. So this will be useful in that case as well. So let's start by loading up a plugin. So I went ahead and loaded up the test plugin that I've been using throughout a lot of these tutorials. And we're going to go as if we are going to upload a mod. And this is the point where I said I'm going to roughly show you how to do it. And once you get past the points I'm going to show you, it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'll just talk you through it because I don't want to actually upload this mod. So if you go to the File menu and click Login to Bethesda.net, which I've already done, you can log in with your Bethesda.net account, and it will allow you then to access this menu, Upload Plugin and Archive to Bethesda.net. So basically, you'll click Login to Bethesda.net. A pop-up will come up telling you to log in, do so, and then the next time you go to the File menu, these options should no longer be grayed out, and you can do so. So you can upload your mod to each of the different platforms. If your mod has any loose files, so if you had to make custom models or any scripts or anything like that, you will not be able to upload to PS4. Well, you technically would be able to upload, but the mod would not function correctly. It would only include the changes you made to your actual ESP file and not the individual files you've created. PC on Xbox One, on the other hand, can use all of the random loose files you've created, and so these are the ones I'm going to focus on. So basically, after you click on one of these, so for example, if I click on PC here, it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to search for stuff in the background, and you may or may not get this particular screen. So there are a couple of circumstances where this will come up. One is you've never created an archive at all for that particular mod, so you don't have any BA2 files for your plugin. It could also come up if you have created those BA2 files, but you've deleted them from, example, your data folder for some reason, or you only kept the ones in your Xbox folder, and then you might get this screen. If instead you had already created the BA2 files, you might get a prompt asking if you want to use those specific BA2 files or if you would prefer to ignore those and create new ones. And then in that case, you'd get a yes/no prompt deciding whether or not you want to use the BA2 files you already have. And then you'll have to make that decision based on whether or not you need to update your BA2 files. The other option you might get is it might tell you that your plugin doesn't require an archive, and then it'll say, do you want to pack your assets by hand? And basically what that's saying is that this creation kit analyzed your plugin, determined that nothing in it was representing or pointing at a custom file, and so that it doesn't think that you actually need any BA2 files, and that's a good sign that you can upload to PS4. So we're going to cover our plugin, which is going to have all sorts of different things in it, and we're going to right away see that we're running into a very common issue with using the creation kit to create archives. Now, I'm going to show you another way to create archives, which I think is the better way to do it, though there is a circumstance where you absolutely have to use the creation kit, or you have to use complicated command lines and stuff, which I'm not even going to bother showing you guys. Is just know that this interface, you can use it, and it can be very simple, but it also has some risks to it. So as you can see here, there are a whole lot of files it's suggesting that I include. Now, if you've been following along with my series, you'll know that I have not created any of these files with the exception of this one at the very top, this test plugin file, this static collection I created. And if you guys are really paying attention, you'll know that I never actually created this on camera, or at least I don't believe I did. I actually could be totally off on that. I might have recreated it, but I know I had recreated that for a demonstration for something I was doing on a different project, and I don't know if I ever did it on camera here. But the point is that most of these are vanilla files, and this is a common thing that will come up, is when you let the creation kit design your archive for you, it's going to grab any file that you even looked at, essentially. So if you opened up some sort of form, so for example, most of these textures have to do with my material swap tutorial where I was creating material swaps. The creation kit determines those as being potential edits, and so it includes them in the list of files that you should probably include. So this is a big problem, and why I tend to recommend that you never use the creation kit to generate your archive files. But if you want to do it because you have a small plugin, or you find the other method I show you to be too cumbersome, all you have to do in here to ensure that it doesn't include anything you don't want is to just select all of these files. So all these vanilla files I know I didn't edit. And in particular, I want to point out these 3 script files. These tend to get added into almost every single plugin, and they should not be included. Including these could be a disaster, especially for players using F4SE, because F4SE creates their own versions of these types of files to add additional functionality. And it can also be a problem because Bethesda has the Creation Club and they continue to update Fallout 4. There's a very good chance in the future that they may change one of these particular files, and then any mod that was including these by mistake because of the creation kit, which there are a lot of mods out there that have these, those mods would all break that new functionality. And this was a problem after Nuka World came out, because a lot of mods had an old version of object_reference.pex, and that was a file that Bethesda changed to add some new functionality for the Nuka World raid system. So if you're a Nuka World player and you found that your raiding has stopped working, there's a very good chance one of your mods has included a very old version of this. So hopefully that's not a problem any longer, as it's been many years since that came out. But just an FYI, you should be very, very careful about any vanilla files. And if you're following the advice that I will tend to follow, that shouldn't be an issue, because I tend to encourage you guys to use not only prefixes, but I'll also be encouraging you when we get to those stages of creating custom files, of creating your own custom subfolders. So you'll be able to see at a glance, if the thing doesn't exist in the subfolders you created, then you'll know that you should probably remove it from this list. Now, obviously, if you're doing some sort of texture replacers or model replacers, that won't be the case. But so far we haven't covered that, so I'm going to assume most of you aren't doing anything like that. So basically all you do if you want to use the CK is you're going to select all of the files, and you can do them in batches. So if I just do a small group and click remove, and then grab another batch and hit remove, and you just want to get it down so it's only the actual files that should be included with your plugin. So the ones that you yourself have created or are including for some reason, and you should not include anything, by the way, on a legal standpoint. You should not include anything from DLCs, and unless you have permission from the mod author, you shouldn't include anything from other mods. You should only include stuff you've created, or you can also include edits of vanilla files. The exception to the DLC rule is if you put your requirements for the DLC files on yours, you can then include replacements for those, but it's a slippery slope, and I would be careful of that. So in general, I would stick to including only your own files unless you know exactly what you're doing. So basically, once you've got it down to just the list of your own files, you'd click this Pack Files button, and it would create your BA2 files automatically for you. And then you'd be done, and on the next screen, it would ask you if you want to create a mod or upload to an existing mod, and I'm sure most of you guys can figure out what to do from there. If you're not comfortable with that and you want a more detailed tutorial, I do have a text tutorial in the Faction Leaders Toolkit for some settlements that will walk you through absolutely step-by-step on everything you have to do to create a mod for Bethesda.net. So if you want something in writing to show you any specifics, feel free to look that up, and there's a whole PDF displaying how to do that. So now that I've shown you how to, or what to be wary of in this particular screen, let's go to another tool, and this is my preferred method for creating BA2 files. And this is also going to be how you would extract the vanilla BA2 files. So if you go into your Fallout 4 tools folder, so this will appear. So if you go into Fallout 4 and then tools, and you'll notice that I'm in my Steam directory. This is the default directory. So if you installed Steam to your default folder, it will be in this exact same path. But if you installed Steam somewhere else, it will be in that. So go into your Fallout 4 directory. As long as you installed the creation kit there will be a tools subfolder, and then within that, the folder called archive2. Now, this is actually the tool that the creation kit uses to do all of these things, but it's actually capable of being used manually. So, in fact, one of the things I recommend people do is go into their Fallout 4 data folder, right-click on one of their BA2 files and hit Open With, and then you can choose Archive2 as the file that automatically opens BA2 files, and then you can just double-click any of the BA2 files from mods, and they'll quickly open up in a way that you can take a look at them and see how people did things, which is pretty powerful. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Archive2 here. And I'm going to show you guys really quickly how to use this program. So let's say, for example, first we'll cover the extracting the vanilla files because it's a very, very useful feature. So I may have to blur some things out here because I have no idea where file open is going to jump. Okay, good. It jumped right to file 4 data. Like sometimes it just jumps to random things on my computer. So let's go ahead and open up a random BA2 file. Obviously, I was talking about opening vanilla, so you might want to open up Fallout 4-main.ba2, but I'm going to just open up a random mod one because the methodology is exactly the same. Now, one thing that's different between the Bethesda files and the mod files is mods can only have 3 different types of BA2s. They can have a main, a textures, and then they can have voice file BA2s, which I don't know of any mods for Fallout 4 that actually use the voice ones. The voice are designed so that you can allow, or you can include translations with your mod. I don't know of any mods that do that because that would be a lot of work to have all of your voice files done in multiple languages, because then you're talking about huge casts of voice characters and multiple files to manage. So it'd be quite the configuration, but that is supported with mods. So almost every mod is going to include just a main.ba2 file or a main and a textures BA2 file. So you can open up either of these types with the archive2 folder. So if we go, or archive2 tools. So let's go ahead and just open up one at random, and you'll see that it lists all of the different things here. And as you can see, ironically, looks like it's the Fire Axe from Fallout Miami. They accidentally did include those scripts folders. So any of you guys from Fallout Miami who are watching this, you might want to go clean up your mod there. And they probably used the CK because it makes it a lot easier to do that. And this is a common mistake that a lot of mod authors do, is these end up included there because it's highly unlikely that they actually edited those 2 files. Even though Bethesda does include those loose script files, so somebody could theoretically edit them, I definitely would avoid that at all costs, especially these low-level ones. But that's way beyond the scope of this video. So basically, let's assume that I opened up one of Bethesda's. You can basically select any of the files you want, and you can then go to Archive and extract selected, and then you can extract them anywhere and you'll have access to those files. Another cool thing you can do here is you can actually filter. So you can start filtering by, typing in part of the path or something. So if I just wanted the meshes, you could filter it, select them, and then again, do the archive selected to. Alternatively, what I like to do on a new development computer is I will open up each of Bethesda's files one at a time, and then I will just hit archive alt, or extract alt to rather, and that will just let me extract everything in there so I have access to the loose files so that if I need to do any conversion or looking at stuff of how they structured it and stuff, I can do so. So if you're going to get heavy into modding, I would actually recommend you do that. It takes up quite a bit of space. I believe just Fallout 4, not including the DLC, I think extracts out to something like 40 gigabytes. I could be wrong on that space, but it's very, very large. So be prepared if you're going to extract everything out. So again, you can do the same thing with the textures files. You can open these up, and in this case, I'll go ahead and just find the Fallout 4 one, and you can see here the Fallout 4, there's a whole bunch of different ones, so that it takes quite a while to extract them all, just because there's so many different individual folders, and then some of them, like the texture ones, actually take quite a while to extract if you do want to do this. But like I said, you can open up any of them the same exact way. They all work with the same exact tool. They all have the same filter, the same extraction, etc. The actual differences between a main BA2 and a textures BA2, I will show you in a moment, but this is how, for those of you looking to extract all the Fallout 4 files, this would be a great way to do it. You can do that with the DLC, you can do it with mods, you can do it with anything to figure out exactly how their files are ticking, and open them up into the appropriate software. So let's assume we're going to go ahead and create our archive files manually for our particular plugin. So basically what you do is you'd open up archive2, and then you're going to open up and I'm going to go ahead and go into a random folder here. So let's go into meshes, and we'll say, because I'm sure I've got a lot of mods that are creating loose files Again, getting back to my little pet peeve here. But let's say I made whatever this 300 AP mod is. Say I made these files and I want them in Archive 2. It's actually as simple as drag and drop. So you can actually drop them in and you'll see the path matches up. And the way that path is determined is that it looks for data and it considers that the top level, and then every other folder below that gets automatically created within the Archive 2 folder. So if you didn't want to operate out of your Fallout 4 data folder, which sometimes I do not for my mods, I will actually create a packaging directory on my hard drive. Like I'll have on my D drive, it'll be just a folder called package mods here. Then there will be a subfolder for the mod, and then under that a data folder, and then I rebuild everything. And that's a great way to prevent myself from including work in progress files. So if you want to be able to make sure you're not including work in progress, that's a great way to do it. Like I said, the data folder is considered the top level, and only the folders underneath data get created. If you don't have a data folder, it will actually recreate every single directory above there within the Archive 2, and that is bad because everything needs to exist underneath data for within the game. And so when you are actually loading these plugins, so when the creation kit goes to look for these particular files, it's assuming that they're going to be under the data folder and then under the appropriate subfolder there. So a mesh will be under data meshes, and then the sounds will be under data sounds, etc. And so if you left all of this in here, so for example, if I didn't have data here and it just created in here C, program files, x86, Steam apps, common, Fallout 4, skipping data, meshes, ammo, 300 AP. So for some reason, if it did all that, then the game would look for all of that structure underneath the Fallout 4 data folder, which likely wouldn't be there. So that would be a problem because when you set things up in the creation kit, you would have been navigating to the folders likely within the Fallout 4 data subfolder. So then all that extra stuff there wouldn't work. So you got to be careful on that. Just if you're going to set up some sort of packaging directory, make sure you start with the data folder at the top. If you're packaging all of your files out of the Fallout 4 data folder already, you don't have to do anything. Literally just drag and drop all the files you want to include, and you're basically done there. So now there's a couple of little exceptions here that we're going to talk about. So sound files are the first one. So let's assume that we have some sort of sound file that we want to include here. What would happen if I included them and then I saved my archive is those sound files would not work. The creation kit would not be able to, or the game would not be able to load them at runtime, even though they would still work in the creation kit and players would not be able to hear them. I have made this mistake with multiple Sim Settlements patches where I've just failed to do this next step, and then the sound files didn't work for anybody else, but they worked fine for me because they were actually sitting loose in my directories and I didn't catch on for quite a while. Until, watching other people play them in videos and seeing that the sounds weren't working. And so the solution to that is actually really simple, and it just has to do with compression. So what you do if you want to include sound files is you first load all of your other files into your archive. Then you're going to go to Archive Settings, and you're going to change the compression to none. And what this does when you change this, as you can see here, changing these settings will only affect files not yet archived. So when you change the compression here to none and then add your sound files in, those sound files will work. And something I haven't mentioned specifically yet, though, is that every single file except for your textures all go in one archive, and then your textures all go in the other. In the rare exception for the voice files, which I anticipate almost none of you will be doing, then those voice files would be separated out into their appropriate language folder or in their appropriate language archive. But assuming most of you are going to be just using main and textures, everything's going to go inside of your one archive except for your texture files, which I'll show that in a minute because that also requires a different archive setting or another compression setting that we'll need to mess with. So basically, once you have changed the setting to none, you can add your sound files. Now, again, before we even do that, there's another thing to watch out for, and that's that you need to, before you mess with that none and actually add your sound files, you need to save your archive with your other stuff so that it gets compressed. Otherwise, these files will end up full size. Now, a lot of these files are actually going to be naturally compressed, especially if you're including stuff that came from the base game and maybe you only edited it inside of software. But if anything you created fresh yourself, for example, mesh files, which I know we haven't covered in this series yet, but I definitely will. I want to cover a little bit of 3ds Max stuff. When you create those mesh files, they're not naturally compressed down, so the creation kit and Archive 2 can do some of those steps for you. But the best thing to do here is to just save this file without with the compression and set to default. So we're going to hit save as. And the way you name these archives is very standardized. So you have to name them exactly the same as your ESP file. So in the case of this, now I know this isn't the stuff that actually is going to go in for our plugin, but we're going to name it this way anyway, just to show you guys an example. You need to name it exactly the same as your plugin. So we need to name this 101 test plugin .esp, or I'm sorry, not .esp, 101 test plugin. So everything but the .esp. So you exclude the .esp or .esl or whatever. Then you're going to add a space. Then you're going to type in a dash, and then your space again, and then the word main with a capital M. This is your primary BA2 file, and this is what includes everything, and it has to be named exactly that. So if later you go back and decide to change the name of your plugin file, you also have to change the name of your BA2 files. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now that these files are saved, they're actually going to be archived and compressed, and then we can go to settings, turn this off, hit OK, and then we can navigate to some sound files. So let's go Fallout 4 sound, and we'll go FX, and we'll see here. We'll grab these random sounds from Animated Chems. Sure, we'll grab that. And now when I save this, this sound actually will function. Now, in this case, this user or this particular mod author, actually, I can tell by the icon, they actually included a .wav file. And a .wav file is an exception. It works regardless of whether the compression is set on or off. And a lot of mods did this. They decided to put full-size WAV files, which are quite huge, because they couldn't get them working in the archive files. By using this compression thing, by turning off the compression, you can actually use Bethesda's .xwm format, and that is substantially smaller. It's usually about 10 times smaller than a WAV file. Excuse me, sometimes much smaller than that even. So you can substantially shave off a lot of file size by using the XWM conversion, which I'll cover that in another tutorial. There are a lot of great tools for converting your sound files to make them smaller, though I think that generally adding new sounds is kind of a more advanced feature, so I don't anticipate most of you are looking to do that yet. But if you are, there are other tutorials available from that, because the sound process for Fallout 4 is generally the same as Skyrim. So most of the mods that cover sound files for Skyrim will apply for Fallout 4 as well. So if those of you who are existing mod authors and you've been wondering why you haven't been able to get your sound files working after you converted them, this is why. It's just this simple setting. You turn off compression, then add your .xwm sound files or your .fuse sound files or whatever the non-wave format is. Then when you resave your archive with that compression off, these will get compressed correctly and they will actually work in the game for players. So that's the first little trick I wanted to show you guys, is the sound file thing, because it's one I see a common issue, and I actually have run into it several times myself. So now let's show you the texture archive, because that is another little tricky one. And again, it's as simple as changing this archive setting. So if we go to archive settings before we set up our archive to create our textures, we're just going to change the compression type under here, actually not under compression. We want to leave that on default. And you might want to do Xbox, but I would actually recommend for Xbox, you let the CK generate the texture compression for Xbox, and I'll show you that in a moment. And we're not gonna talk about that Xbox. Generally, don't set this as Xbox. You're gonna want to leave this as default. And same thing with this Xbox DDS, you're going to want to ignore this setting because it actually causes a lot of problems. With Xbox, the textures will end up showing kind of a rainbow effect. I'm sure many of you have seen that before, and I'll cover how you deal with that in a minute. So basically what you're going to do is, if you're creating your texture archive, just change this to DDS, hit OK, and then you're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing you did with the other ones. You're just going to drag and drop those textures. So let's just go into Data Textures. We'll find again, we'll just go to Animated Chems Redone, and you just drag and drop all of the files you want. You can actually do it at a folder level too. So if I wanted to grab the entire Animated Chems Redone texture folder, I could do that. And this is, again, why I like to keep my stuff in their own custom folders. So I'll make sure, for example, you don't see it here because I don't have all of my stuff loose on here. I do develop Workshop Plus on this particular computer, so that has a loose file here. But basically, all of my textures for Workshop Plus are in here. What I was getting at before was Sim Settlements, is that you don't see that here, but you do see Workshop Plus because I do develop that here. Is I keep all of my textures for Workshop Plus under a Workshop Plus folder in textures. Then I can just drag and drop the whole thing, and then I don't have to go searching around for all of my different files. So if you, for example, had extracted all of Bethesda's stuff and you saw that they use this pattern of things they use, landscape, interiors. They have all of this pattern of different folders. You might be tempted to just stick your stuff within those same folders, and I would advise against that just because it makes it a real pain to do this step. Whereas if you create all these subfolders again underneath your own mod folder, you can just drag and drop your mod folder right into Archive 2 and instantly add all of these things. Now, you do have to watch out for occasional little oddities that get pulled into here. For example, you can see this folder managed by Vortex, stuff like that gets pulled in. If you are using certain utility programs, you can end up with like thumbnail files that are in here. They'll just be weird formatted files, or you might find that you have added some random files, like maybe you left your Photoshop files in there or something. And this is a great way to, you just flip through here and check and make sure that everything in here is what you expected. And then you can remove those that don't. And then again, we just save this. We'll do the same thing again. We're going to do 101 test plugin, but this time instead of -main, you do -textures, and this one is plural, so textures. And now we've got our textures archive, and this one is giving me errors here, and that it's because it says it's got this texture. See, so this is a point what I was talking about where the archive tool will actually handle manipulation of the texture files, and it will actually compress them down. In this case, this particular DDS file has something odd about it. It's likely not in the correct format for the game to use correctly, so it probably needs to be re-exported from Photoshop into some sort of other format, which I will get into that in a future tutorial, showing you guys how to correctly export all of your different textures into the correct format that the game expects, because there are a ton of different options for creating DDS files from various plugins, but there are only certain options that work, and it's a very tricky thing to get right, because sometimes you can make your file unnecessarily huge or way too small, which distorts it. So I'll go over that in another tutorial. But in this case, these errors are basically because I left all of those folder managed by Vortex, so those are going to get skipped. This particular DDS file wasn't formatted correctly for the game, so these are expected errors, and they're not a big deal. It doesn't prevent that from actually saving, but just watch out for those. I would definitely read through the log and see if there's anything unexpected you get. For example, these types of DDS errors, if you get that, that's a good sign. You're going to need to go look up how you handle DDS textures and how you export them correctly. So once you've created that, then you will see that in your data folder, those two files I saved are there. And then if I were to go in here and do file, upload plugin, PC, you can see that, well, first of all, I need to save because I clearly edited something. But here, you'll get this archive exists prompt. So this is saying, hey, we already determined that you made some BA2 files. Do you want to just use those ones you created? You can say yes, and it will use them, or you can say no, and it will get that screen I showed you at the beginning of the video where it allows you to package up the files based on what the creation kit thinks you want to include. So then if I were to say yes here, it would bring me up to the create new mod screen, which I'll go ahead and do now just so that those of you guys are wanting to see it. But basically, you can hit create new mod here, or you can double click or click one of your existing mods and hit edit mod, and it'll allow you to upload changes to it. All right, so we're not going to do that. We're going to edit any of my mods or upload this janky test plugin up there. So that covers a lot of what I wanted to talk about. Now, the last thing I want to show you is how to create Xbox texture archives. So, because I recommend you do not do them with Archive 2. Technically, it's capable of it, but I have never had a good experience with it. I tend to always find that it ends up creating kind of busted plugins. So what I've done, and a trick I have for you guys, and this trick can also be used if you find that when you're uploading your files with the creation kit, if you're allowing it to create your archives for you, because for whatever reason you don't like using the archive method I just showed you, if you find that it takes forever, like it can sometimes, just to get that screen up to show you which things you should use, it can take upwards of an hour for the CK to generate those. So I'm going to show you a trick to avoid that problem, especially if you have a lot of textures for Xbox. So we're going to upload a special plugin that I've created, and you can create one of these yourself. It's just a blank plugin. So all I did to create it was I loaded up fallout4.esm, and then I immediately just saved the plugin, and I saved it as just a completely blank plugin, which I will have down here. It's just called AAA Archive Trick, and we're going to make that active, and I actually got to find my 101 plugin and disable that. So we're going to double click that to turn that off. And all this AAA is a completely blank plugin file, and I'm going to load that up, and it should load relatively quickly because it's just going to have to load the fallout4.esm. Now, the reason for this blank ESP file for loading up Xbox textures is because then the game isn't going to analyze my plugin and find anything to make suggestions, because that is one of the slower parts. So if you had trouble with the CK being really, really slow, you can use a blank plugin to create your archive, and then it won't have anything to detect, which I'll show you what that looks like in a second, and that way you get to just hand create your archive file. And in this step, I'm also going to show you a way to speed up this process, not necessarily the loading, but the actual creating of the archives. Because when you're updating your archives, you can actually have created a save file of the previous archive you created so that you can speed up this next process, which I'll show you as soon as this finishes loading here. But the idea here is you're going to use the CK, the creation kit, to generate your texture archive for Xbox. For your main BA2 file for Xbox, you can just use your PC one. And to do that, so I'm gonna, while that did finish loading, but I'll show you this, and I actually should have done it while we were waiting for that to load. But you can basically take your BA2, your main.ba2 file that you're going to upload for your plugin, and you can drop it into a folder called XB1, which will be under your Fallout 4 data. If you don't have this folder, you can just create it yourself, and you can just copy paste your main.ba2 right in there, and then that will work totally fine in Xbox One. So you don't have to do anything special for the main. It's just these textures one that you have to do something special for Xbox. So once you've created your main.ba2 for PC, just make sure you have an XB1 folder here inside of data under your Fallout 4 and just copy it there. You're done there. And for the textures folder, or textures file, you're going to, again, go to the upload plugin. Again, I'm still logged in because I never closed the CK, but if you needed to, you would log in first. Go to Xbox One. And because I have a blank plugin, the CK wasn't able to detect any external assets I was using, so it's going to say an archive might not be necessary. Do you want to add them by hand? So it's basically saying, hey, maybe I missed something, but I don't think there are any files you need to include. So we're going to say yes, we want to create it by hand. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start adding our files by hand. Now, one of the pains in the butt about this method is that the CK cannot add entire directories. It has to add folders within a directory, or files within a directory. It can at least do it can handle a shift or control select. So for example, if I go add here and we go down to data textures, and let's just assume we're going to do the animated chems redone thing, I can't just select all of these folders. What it's going to do is end up opening one of the ones at random in the list. So what you end up having to do is you go into one of the subfolders down as deep as you can, then you select all the files there and you see it'll add them, and then you repeat this process. And this is the thing where I can show you something to save time in the future, because obviously that is very obnoxious, but it's unfortunately required for the initial Xbox release. So let's say that these are all the textures I was going to include. The next step I would tell you to do is export this list. So for example, for something like Sim Settlements where I have tons of textures and it's rare that we have to edit them, but when we do, I don't want to have to go through all that process of grabbing each individual file into the subfolders. What you do is you'll export the list, and that'll allow you to save that somewhere. You'll be able to save this list, and then in the future you can import that file back in. So for example, for Sim Settlements, I have this list for each of the expansions and each of my different mods that use textures. I have these lists exported and saved, and then if I add a new texture, I just import it, and then I only have to add that new texture and allow that to be added to the archive through this system, rather than having to re-find all of these files every single time I want to update the Xbox archive. So once I've got everything added here, I'm going to hit export list and save it so that I don't have to deal with the trouble in the future. Then you're going to hit pack files, and it will convert those into Xbox format. It creates the BA2 folder, and it stores it under this Xbox One folder, so you can see that it's AAA archive trick -textures. So then all you would have to do is exit out of the CK and then rename this to your plugin. So then I would just rename this AA archive trick to my 101 test plugin, so it matches the exact name of my plugin file. And now this is ready to go. It will work, but the game or CK does not care that this used to be named something else. There's nothing in the BA2 file to flag it as belonging to a particular mod, so renaming it is totally cool. And now I've got the texture file created for my plugin, and then it will work for Xbox. So this one I want to leave in the Xbox One folder. I do not want to use it for my PC update, and I don't want to overwrite this textures file from my data folder, because the one in my data folder is compressed and formatted for PC. So by default, the BA2 file you create with Archive2, that's going to be optimized for PC. And the one that created in the CK, when I chose file upload Xbox One, will be formatting all those textures to work specifically for Xbox One. So that's very, very important. Now, there are extra things that can be formatted for Xbox One, and we'll get into that when we start doing custom model files. But if you're not doing custom mesh files, literally textures are the only thing that are different between PC and Xbox, and you don't have to do anything fancy. And if you're using edited mesh files, such as in NifScope, And even those created in 3ds Max, I've found that it doesn't actually matter. The PC ones seem to work just fine on Xbox, but I do know people who have said that there are ways to compress the files in a way that will work specifically for Xbox, and that it has to do with the collision. I haven't run into any issues, and I have played through some settlements on Xbox, and we use a lot of custom meshes. So as far as I can tell, the only thing that really is important is making sure you make your texture folders or your texture archive file for Xbox through the CK. And I just showed you some tricks there to make that a little easier with that dummy mod. Essentially, use a dummy plugin to create that. So I think that should give you guys all the information you need to use the Archive 2 tool. Now you're warned about the dangers of CK archiving, and you know how to get sound files and Xbox texture files. So I think that covers everything. If you have any additional questions on archiving, or you want to see more in the future, definitely leave some comments below, and I will try to cover those either in a future video, or I will get back to you in the comments. All right, thanks guys, and watch out for more tutorials. Got tons and tons and tons more to cover in the future, including some of the stuff I mentioned earlier in this video.